Carlin brought into a bostal, an institution for juvenile incarceration which the Criminal Justice Act of 1982 abolished, establishing youth custody centres as a replacement, quickly comes to terms that Banks, sometimes referred to as Pongo, is the daddy around here, the controlling and abusive leader of the trainees, as Carlin learns of the ways that other trainees spent their sentence protesting. As the court sentence was officially called bostal training, the occupants of a bostal were often referred to as trainees, balanced against the racism and violence of more powerful trainees and the corrupt officers who are meant to moderate and manage the bostal. Carlin is adamant on rising up through the ranks to become the new daddy, using whatever means he has at his disposal. This is Alan Clarke's infamous and controversial film Scum, reputed for his disturbing depiction of violence. Scum is also a clearly observed criticism of the British penal system that, in its intent to reduce violence, encourages it instead. Scum avoids simply falling into the category of exploitation cinema due to its depictions of protest and defiance, both silent protest and overt vocal rioting against a flawed system which breeds more damage than resolution, as well as Scum's depictions of the lack of mental health support and the means for proper rehabilitation. The brutality of Scum, from its hyper-violent nature, its portrayal of the normalisation of racism, and the lack of support when it's most necessary, continues to shock over 40 years later. The brutality of Scum is undeniable. Its depiction of violence, racism, and a clear lack of empathy towards the mental health of the trainees within the bostal still remains distressing viewing. On its initial release, Scum was met with intense controversy regarding its violence, as well as its bitter criticism of the youth penal system in Britain at the time. Writing for the LA Times, Justin Chang outlined Scum's controversy, highlighting its origins as a television play removed from scheduling, stating that, directed by Clarke and written by Roy Minton, that meticulously researched 78-minute production was commissioned as part of the BBC's Play for Today anthology series, but was withheld from broadcast due to its shocking nature. Clarke, showing the fearlessness that would cement his reputation as one of the UK's most uncompromising social realists, responded by remaking the material in 1979 as a theatrical feature that proved even more graphic and unsparing in its treatment of the bostal's dehumanising conditions. The charges of obscenity and calls for censorship that greeted the new version were, if anything, a testament to its excoriating power. When it was finally shown on television in 1983, by which point the bostal system had been reformed, Clarke's ghastly depiction of officially sanctioned violence and other horrors had already taken on the stench of truth. While the bostal system has been abolished, the reason why Scum continued to take on its stench of truth is due to the film's focus on the truth that rehabilitation cannot happen in environments of injustice, where innocent individuals are punished for the actions of others, such as the scene when Davis's radio is confiscated after another trainee dishonestly claims that Davis has stolen it from him, or when genuine cries for help are dismissed with cruel dehumanization and discrimination, such as suicide, being met with racist slurs, dragged away and treated less than the human being he was. The controversy stirred around Scum comes from the discomforting nature of its depiction of truth regarding a flawed and corrupt penal system, with less interest in rehabilitation and more focus on cruel punishment via the normalisation of racism and assault. With the direct and confrontational nature of Scum's commentary and its unflinching narrative, the film further reinforces Alan Clarke's influential and underrated legacy over independent British cinema. Elaborating on this, Justin Chang also writes that it's hard to watch Scum today, that sentence could end right there, without seeing its narrative and stylistic influence on numerous British prison dramas that have emerged since. Steve McQueen's Hunger and David Mackenzie's Starred Up, not least among them. It's a reminder of the enduring, if underappreciated, legacy of Clarke, who worked primarily in television and succeeded in putting his aesthetic signature on what has historically been considered a writer's medium. Scum is more than just its barrage of violent and racist abuse, and its legacy continues to inspire independent prison dramas which follow in its footsteps due to the intelligent clarity and observance it has in examining injustice. Injustice is key within Scum, a depiction of a flawed penal system with restricted abilities in its rehabilitation. Funding is clearly poor, as a cook's frustration demonstrates his inability to cook crispy fish batter due to the lack of funds for the proper ingredients, and a lack of mental health support, incredibly clear when Davis cries for help from the bostal officer, clearly distressed and traumatized after experiencing sexual assault, only to be met with dehumanizing belittlement. This is a system which does not work, and is inevitably bound to create forms of protest. For example, the character Archer implements a passive-aggressive and quiet form of protest in every facet of his time within the bostal, painting "I am happy" across the wall. He is reprimanded, demanded to attend the housemaster's office immediately, therefore escaping from the painting duty he was initially responsible for. In a conversation with Carlin, Archer expresses that as a vegetarian, he refuses to wear leather, and so therefore marches barefoot, acknowledging that he gets plenty of hassle for his quiet protests. He also views a silver lining in disrupting the authoritarian control the bostal officers wish to implement over him. As long as he gets to irritate the screws and pigs, he views it as a win. A complete antithesis to Archer's more peaceful methods, Carlin's rejection of corrupt authority comes through sheer violence, rising through the trainee-based ranks to gain a wider influence over the bostal that the officers can do very little about. Once Carlin beats Banks's face into the sink within an inch of his life, there is an established unwritten rule: anyone who snitches, they'll be in Carlin's sights next. Similar to ruling with an iron thumb, in this regard, Carlin seemingly has a heavier influence over the other trainees than the actual bostal officers, to the extent that the housemaster requests Carlin to keep tensions low after Toyn's suicide, which has resulted in some trainees becoming vocal against authority, therefore expressing their own form of protest. We can view Carlin's aggression as a form of anti-authority protest because his actions are intent on disrupting the authority within the bostal. It's almost a cruel reflection of fighting fire with fire. If Carlin is beaten to a pulp, then Carlin needs to beat back harder. There is, however, a limitation to Carlin's influence, which demonstrates the cyclical nature of violence within the bostal, and in which the injustice of the bostal becomes overwhelming. Carlin doesn't have eyes everywhere. Davis, a mild-mannered, meek young lad, during gardening duties, is sexually abused by 3 older trainees. Suffering from the trauma and depression, Davis reaches out to a bostal officer who cruelly dismisses Davis's pleas for help, further exacerbating the loneliness and despair Davis experiences, leading to his suicide. The preventable suicide of another trainee demonstrates effectively the lack of mental health support for the trainees within the bostal system, reflective of Britain's own currently dwindling mental health resources. In retaliation, in protest, during breakfast, the trainees chant, and encouraged by Carlin's action of throwing his food tray up to the wall, a riot tears through the cafeteria, seemingly showing no signs of stopping. Carlin's influence is at a peak here. His power, and the unity of the other trainees, serves as a defiant roar against the manipulation of authority. It is an anti-authoritarian cry of power that they can't all be stopped, at least for the time being. Images of the riots are suddenly disrupted with Carlin dragged, seemingly unconscious, face blooded. The authoritarianism has won. To paraphrase the Clash lyrics, they fought the law, and the law won. Clarke Scum directly addresses that to dismantle authoritarian injustice is a losing battle for many. A stark real-life contrast reinforcing this message when considering criticisms towards and protests against authority is the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, in which Alexei has stated Vladimir Putin was responsible for due to Alexei's criticisms of the dictator. A vocal critic of authoritarianist cruelty, Alexei Navalny became the target of cruelty himself. While Clarke Scum specifically focuses on the injustices of the British penal system, Scum holds a deeper relevancy when reflecting on similar injustices given by a system of vicious authority, an authority so vicious that within Scum it punishes the other trainees for the suicide spurned on by the bostal's own lack of support and protection for a sexual assault victim, and it's within the criticism of authority that reinforces Scum as a socially conscious classic of British cinema. In conclusion, Clarke Scum, while while deserving of its controversial status due to its unflinching portrayal of violence and the malevolent normalization of racism, the film also demonstrates the vicious cycle of authoritarian control that leads to more violence. Injustice is served, people retaliate and protest in response, receiving further violent injustice, encouraging further protest. A clear criticism of the British penal system, Scum's observations also transcend its setting and reflects the cycle of injustice of the wider world where authoritarianism and dictatorship rule. It's a harrowing observation of a system of injustice much larger than a single bostal, and through Alan Clarke's critical storytelling, the viewer is made all the more aware of the cruelty which remains in power. A special thank you to my incredible tier Patreon supporter, Gil, and my super Patreon supporters Constantine Bombelli and Victoria.